Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I never imagined my life would become a story people would tell in hushed tones, the kind of story where neighbors lower their voices and say, "Poor woman, she really went through it." But here I am, telling it myself. Not because I want sympathy, not because I need revenge, but because somewhere out there is another woman sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone, wondering why her husband's love disappeared and blaming herself for it. I was her, and I'm not anymore. My name is Nadia. I'm 42 years old, mother of two, and until 3 years ago, I believed I had a stable, loving marriage, or at least I believed that's what we had built. My husband, Kamran, and I met in our 20s. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who could make a room laugh without trying. I was quieter, steadier. People said we balanced each other, and for a long time, I believed them. We didn't have a perfect marriage, no one does, but we had routines. Sunday breakfasts, family movie nights, long car rides where the children fell asleep in the back seat while we talked about dreams we never fully pursued. I thought love meant staying even when things got dull. I thought loyalty meant swallowing discomfort and smiling through it. The first crack appeared so quietly I almost missed it. Kamran started coming home later. Extra work, he'd say. New project. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped noticing when I cut my hair or wore a new dress. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I had become boring. Maybe I talked too much about the kids. Maybe I didn't look the way I used to. I told myself every excuse a woman tells herself when she's terrified of the truth. Then came the phone, always face down, always with him, even in the bathroom. If a message popped up, he'd smile slightly before locking the screen. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I didn't confront him. I told myself not to be suspicious. I told myself trust was the foundation of marriage. One night, after the kids were asleep, I finally asked him, calmly, casually, "Is everything okay between us?" He looked at me like I'd interrupted something important. Why wouldn't it be? "You've been distant." He sighed. "I'm just tired. Work is stressful. Don't overthink it." And I didn't. Not out loud, anyway. But inside, something started screaming. Weeks passed. Months. My anxiety grew quiet and constant, like a background hum. I tried harder, cooked his favorite meals, bought new clothes, suggested weekend trips, initiated intimacy even when I felt unwanted. I smiled through every insecurity because I believed love meant effort. I believed if I just loved him better, he'd return to me. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. Ordinary, unremarkable. I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He had left it there by accident. The screen lit up, a message preview. "Can't stop thinking about last night," emoji. My hands froze mid-fold. My heart didn't even race at first. It stopped, like my body was protecting me from the impact. I told myself not to look, to respect privacy, to trust my husband. But another part of me, older, wiser, desperate, picked up the phone with trembling fingers. The password was our anniversary. How painfully ironic. There were hundreds of messages, pictures, voice notes, plans, love words that once belonged to me, now written for someone else. A woman named Sana, younger, carefree, flirtatious. She called him my love. He called her my escape. I sat on the kitchen floor with that phone in my hand, laundry spilling around me like fallen feathers. I didn't cry at first. I just read every message, every betrayal, until my chest finally broke open and the tears came without sound. When Kamran came home that night, I was waiting, the phone on the table, my eyes dry, my voice steady. "Who is Sana?" His face changed. Not guilt, not sorrow, panic, then irritation, as if I'd opened a door he didn't want to explain. "It's not what you think," he said. Every woman who's been betrayed knows those words. They mean exactly what you think. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just asked, "How long?" He told me. A year. 1 full year of lies, of late nights, of stolen words, of me making excuses for his absence while he built another life in secret. I thought I would collapse, but something strange happened. I felt numb, like my heart had stepped out of my body to survive. He tried to justify it, said he felt unappreciated, said I was always tired, said we lost spark, as if betrayal was a reasonable solution to boredom. I listened, and in that moment I realized something devastating. He was not sorry. He was only sorry he got caught. That night, he slept in the guest room. I lay in our bed staring at the ceiling. Every memory replayed differently now. Every "I love you" contaminated. Every anniversary tainted. I felt like my life had been quietly rewritten without my consent. The next morning, he tried to apologize, said he'd end it, said we could go to counseling, said we could fix this. And for a brief moment, I considered it, because when you've built your identity around being someone's wife, the idea of starting over feels like stepping off a cliff. So I tried. I tried to forgive. I tried to rebuild. I tried to be the bigger person. I tried to ignore the way he still checked his phone with that same secretive smile. I tried to believe him when he said he'd changed. But trust is not a switch. It doesn't turn back on because someone says sorry. I started checking his phone again, listening to his calls, analyzing every move. I became a detective in my own marriage, a role I never wanted. And the worst part? I hated myself for it. I hated the woman I was becoming, suspicious, exhausted, desperate. One evening, after another argument where he accused me of not letting it go, I found myself on my knees in our bedroom, begging him, literally begging. "Please," I said, my voice cracking, "please choose us. Choose me. I'll do better. I'll change. Just don't throw this away." He looked at me, not with love, not with remorse, but with discomfort, embarrassment, as if my pain inconvenienced him. And that's when it happened. A quiet moment, a shift, a realization that slid into my chest like a stone. I saw myself, a grown woman, a mother, on her knees, pleading for the bare minimum, for loyalty, for respect, for love that should have been freely given. And I thought, when did I become someone who begs to be valued? I stood up, slowly, my legs shaking but my spine straighter than it had been in months. He kept talking, explaining, promising, but I wasn't listening anymore, because in that moment, something inside me whispered, "Enough." Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. Enough. And that was the first step. Not the last, not the victory, just the first tiny crack in the prison I'd built for myself. I didn't know yet how hard the journey would be. I didn't know how much I'd lose or how much I'd gain. I only knew one thing. I was done begging. And that decision would change everything.
The morning after I decided I was done begging, I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful, but now felt like a stage before a storm. I lay in bed staring at the faint light creeping across the ceiling and realized something terrifying. I had no plan. I just knew I couldn't live like this anymore. Cameron was still asleep in the guest room. The children would wake in an hour. Breakfast would need to be made, school uniforms ironed. Life would expect me to move as if nothing inside me had shattered. And yet, something had changed. I didn't feel like pleading anymore. I felt like observing, like someone who had stepped outside her own life to finally see it clearly. At breakfast, Cameron tried to act normal. He asked our son about his math test. He reminded our daughter to tie her shoelaces properly. He even poured me tea, the same tea I'd poured him every morning for 15 years. I watched his hands as he placed the cup in front of me. Those hands had once held mine in the hospital when our daughter was born. Those hands had also typed love messages to another woman. The contradiction was almost unbearable. He said quietly, "We should talk tonight." I nodded, not because I wanted to, but because I needed clarity. Not for him, for me. All day my mind replayed every choice that had led me here. The times I stayed silent to keep peace, the dreams I put aside, the way I measured my worth by how much I could endure. I realized that somewhere along the line, I had disappeared inside the role of wife and mother. I didn't even know who I was without them. That evening, after the children were asleep, we sat in the living room, the same couch where we once watched movies wrapped in one blanket. Now there was a careful distance between us, like a physical reflection of everything broken. Cameron said he wanted another chance, that he'd ended things with Sana, that he was willing to work on us. He said it like a business proposal, controlled, practical, devoid of warmth. I listened quietly. Then I asked, "Why did you really stay after I found out?" He looked surprised. "Because we're married, because of the kids." "And me," I asked, "did you stay because you love me?" He didn't answer immediately, and that pause told me everything. I took a slow breath. "I'm not going to beg you anymore. I won't compete with someone else for my own husband." He frowned. "So what are you saying?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I know I won't live in a marriage where I'm not respected." He got defensive, said I was exaggerating, said every couple goes through things, said I was overreacting. And that word, overreacting, it snapped something in me. I stood up. "You lied to me for a year. You gave another woman the affection I begged you for, and now you're asking me to accept scraps and call it love? I'm not overreacting. I'm finally reacting." I walked away from the conversation, walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and for the first time since discovering the affair, I cried not from desperation, but from release. The next weeks were some of the hardest of my life. I started quietly planning. I checked our finances. I realized I barely knew how much was in our savings. I didn't know the details of the mortgage. I had trusted him with everything, and now I had to learn fast. I contacted an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She was divorced, independent, strong. I told her everything over tea, my hands wrapped around the cup like it was keeping me upright. She listened without judgment. Then she said, "Nadia, you've been surviving for so long, but survival is not living." Her words stayed with me. I started taking small steps. I updated my resume. I searched for part-time work. I signed up for an online course in bookkeeping, something practical, something that could give me my own income, my own safety net. Each small action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had given away. Cameron noticed the changes. He asked questions. Where was I going? Why was I on the laptop so late? Why was I suddenly so distant? I didn't tell him everything, not because I was hiding, but because for once, my plans didn't revolve around him. One night, he confronted me. "Are you planning to leave me?" I looked at him, really looked. The man I once thought was my whole world now looked like someone I barely knew. "I'm planning to stop losing myself for anyone," I said. "If that leads to leaving, then yes, maybe." He got angry, accused me of tearing the family apart, said I was being selfish. That word again, selfish, as if caring for my own dignity was a crime. For a moment, guilt tried to rise, the old familiar voice, but I pushed it away. I thought of my daughter. What example was I setting? That love meant accepting betrayal? That marriage meant erasing yourself? No, I wanted her to know better. One evening, after another cold dinner eaten in silence, I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. My eyes were tired, my hair pulled back carelessly, my shoulders curved inward. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I whispered to her, "I'm sorry. Sorry for ignoring her needs, sorry for staying small, sorry for begging someone to see her worth." Then I said, "I won't abandon you again." That became my promise. The turning point came a week later. Cameron's phone buzzed. This time, he didn't hide it fast enough. I saw the name, Sana. Something inside me went still. Not raging, not devastated, just done. He saw my expression and tried to explain. "She just messaged to ask how I'm doing. I didn't start it." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, "You told me it ended." He said nothing. And in that silence, my decision settled completely. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. I wrote down everything I needed to do: legal advice, separate bank account, budget, apartment listings, school transfer possibilities. Every line I wrote felt like reclaiming territory from a life that had been built without my consent. Fear was there, of course it was. Fear of money, of loneliness, of social judgment, of starting over at 42. But beneath the fear was something new, determination. I wasn't running away from my marriage. I was walking towards myself. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I felt free enough to begin. The first thing I did after making my plan was something so small it almost felt silly. I opened a new bank account in my own name, just mine. No joint access, no shared passwords. When the banker handed me the paperwork, I held it like it was a passport to a country I had never been allowed to enter. Financial independence. The word sounded adult, serious, slightly terrifying. But when I deposited my first small amount, money I had quietly saved from household allowances over the years, I felt something powerful stir in my chest. I was building a door, and soon I would have the key. I didn't tell Kamran, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed something that belonged only to me, a space untouched by his decisions. Next came the lawyer. Sitting in that office explaining my marriage to a stranger in a crisp suit made everything suddenly real. I expected to feel ashamed. Instead, I felt like a patient describing an illness that finally had a diagnosis. The lawyer explained my rights, custody options, financial divisions, the process of separation. Each word made my future more solid, less like a terrifying fog. When I left the office, I stood outside in the afternoon sun and breathed deeply. My legs were shaking, but I had taken another step. At home, life continued in tense politeness. Kamran still came home, still ate dinner, still watched television, but the warmth was gone. We were roommates, playing roles for the children. One night, my son asked, "Mom, why don't you and Dad sit together anymore?" His innocent question stabbed me deeper than any argument. I smiled and said, "Adults sometimes need space, sweetheart." But later, in the bathroom, I pressed my hands against the sink and fought the urge to scream. I didn't want to break my children's hearts. That fear almost made me abandon everything, almost made me crawl back into the familiar pain. But then I imagined my daughter grown, kneeling before a husband who betrayed her, begging him to stay, and I knew I had to show her a different ending. The job search was brutal. Rejection emails, interviews that went nowhere. Doubt whispered that I was too old, too inexperienced, too late. But one morning, I got a call from a small accounting firm. They needed a junior bookkeeper, part-time, modest salary, nothing glamorous. I accepted immediately. My first day at work, I sat at my desk and touched the keyboard like it was sacred. Numbers on the screen, coffee in my own mug, a name tag that said Nadia without wife of attached. When my first paycheck arrived, I cried, not because of the amount, but because it was mine. Kamran noticed the change in me. I stood taller. I spoke less, but with certainty. I no longer asked for permission. I simply informed. One evening, he said, "You've changed." I replied, "I know." He didn't like it. The version of me who begged and pleaded was easy to control. This woman, quiet and steady, made him uneasy. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. He walked into the kitchen holding my notebook, the one with my plans. He must have gone through my bag. "What is this?" he asked, waving the pages. "You're planning to leave. You've been lying to me." I stared at him. A year of his lies, and now he was outraged by my preparation. I took the notebook from his hand. "I'm planning to protect myself." He raised his voice, accused me of destroying the family, of poisoning the children's future, of being dramatic. And for the first time, I didn't defend myself. I simply said, "I will not stay married to a man who lies and then blames me for wanting safety." He stared, then laughed bitterly. "Where will you go? You can't survive on your own." Those words burned, not because I believed them, but because I once would have. I looked him in the eyes. "Watch me." That night I packed a suitcase, not to leave immediately, but to remind myself I could. The next day, I told the children we were going to visit my sister for the weekend. When we arrived, I sat my sister down and told her everything. She hugged me without asking questions. She made tea. She gave me a room. For the first time in months, I slept without hearing Kamran's footsteps in the hallway. On Sunday evening, when it was time to return, my daughter asked, "Mom, can we stay here longer?" I knew then that the children had felt the tension more than I admitted. That night, I called Kamran. "I'm staying at my sister's for a while," I said. "We need time apart." He argued, threatened, pleaded, but my voice stayed calm. "I'll send you the lawyer's contact. We'll discuss custody like adults." I hung up. My hand shook, my heart raced, but my decision held. The first week away was a storm of emotions: relief, guilt, fear, grief. I cried in the shower so the children wouldn't see. I smiled at breakfast so they would feel safe. I applied for more jobs. I checked apartment listings. I opened school enrollment websites. Every small task built my new life brick by brick. Kamran sent messages, some angry, some apologetic, some manipulative. "The kids need their father. You're overreacting. Come home and we'll fix this." I didn't respond to most. Silence was my boundary. One evening, as I watched my children do homework at the kitchen table at my sister's home, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness, not triumph, just peace. No waiting for late-night arrivals, no checking phones, no begging for attention, no shrinking myself to keep someone else comfortable. Just me, my children, a borrowed home, and a future unwritten. I knew harder days would come, legal battles, financial strain, emotional fallout, but I also knew something important. I had already survived the worst part, the moment I chose myself. The first month of separation passed in a strange blur. Days were busy with school runs, work, and trying to keep life feeling normal for the children. Nights were quiet in a way that still felt unfamiliar. I would lie in bed at my sister's house and listen to the ceiling fan hum, thinking about how quickly a life could change direction when one truth finally refused to be ignored. Kamran and I began speaking through lawyers. Cold, formal emails replaced the conversations that once happened over dinner. Every message felt like another thread cut from the fabric of what used to be our life. I expected each communication to hurt, but over time I noticed something surprising. The pain was less sharp. The fog in my mind was clearing. Then came the first court meeting. I sat in a waiting room with other couples who also looked exhausted and scared, women holding files, men staring at their phones, children coloring. The first month of separation passed in a strange blur. Days were busy with school runs, work, and trying to keep life feeling normal for the children. Nights were quiet in a way that still felt unfamiliar. I would lie in bed at my sister's house and listen to the ceiling fan hum, thinking about how quickly a life could change direction when one truth finally refused to be ignored. Kamran and I began speaking through lawyers. Cold, formal emails replaced the conversations that once happened over dinner. Every message felt like another thread cut from the fabric of what used to be our life. I expected each communication to hurt, but over time I noticed something surprising. The pain was less sharp. The fog in my mind was clearing. Then came the first court meeting. I sat in a waiting room with other couples who also looked exhausted and scared, women holding files, men staring at their phones, children coloring on the floor. I realized we were all carrying private storms behind polite expressions. When my name was called, my heart hammered against my ribs. I walked into the room and saw Kamran across the table. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, just less powerful, less in control. For the first time, he was not directing the story. The lawyer spoke. Numbers were discussed. Custody schedules proposed. Assets listed. It felt strange hearing our 15-year marriage summarized as documents and percentages. At one point, the mediator asked Kamran if he believed reconciliation was possible. He glanced at me. I looked back, calm and steady. He said, "I think trust has been broken." I almost laughed. The irony was thick, but instead I simply nodded. "Yes," I said, "it has." And that was that. No begging, no pleading, no promises, just acceptance. After the meeting, I walked out into the bright daylight. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter, as if each legal step was also a spiritual one, cutting chains I hadn't realized were wrapped around my ankles. Of course, not everything was smooth. There were days when the children cried for their father, days when my son asked if this was his fault, days when my daughter hugged me so tightly I could feel her little heart racing against mine. On those days, I reminded myself that children don't need a perfect family. They need an honest one. They need a mother who teaches them self-respect through example, not words. I explained gently, "Mom and Dad both love you, but sometimes adults make mistakes and they can't stay together in a healthy way. This is not because of you, this is because of us." I repeated it until they believed it, and maybe until I did too. Work became my refuge, my tiny desk, my calculator, my coffee mug. Each completed task gave me confidence. Each compliment from my supervisor felt like proof that I was capable beyond my roles at home. One afternoon, my supervisor said, "You're doing great, Nadia. Have you ever considered full-time work? We'd love to have you." I almost said no out of habit. The old voice in my head whispered, "You can't handle that. You have children. You're too late to start over." But I remembered the woman on her knees begging for love, and I refused to go back. "I'd like that," I said. And just like that, another door opened. Kamran didn't take my growing independence well. He started showing up unannounced at my sister's house, wanting to see the children. Sometimes he'd bring gifts. Sometimes he'd bring guilt. One evening, he pulled me aside and said, "We can still fix this. Look at everything we're losing." I looked around at my sister's small living room, the children watching cartoons, my sister folding laundry, my simple life. Then I looked at him, the man who had another woman's name still appearing on his phone. I already lost what mattered. I lost trust. I lost myself. I'm not losing those again. He stared, speechless, and I realized something powerful. He no longer had power over my decisions. As the months passed, the divorce finalized. I signed the papers with steady hands. My name on each page felt like reclaiming territory. When it was over, I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office and just breathed. 15 years ended with ink on paper. No dramatic music, no applause, just a quiet end. That night, I bought a small cake from the grocery store, not to celebrate divorce, but to honor survival. My children and I ate it at the kitchen table. We laughed at the messy frosting. For the first time in a long time, joy felt possible again. Eventually, I found a modest apartment, 2 bedrooms, a tiny balcony, a kitchen with worn cabinets. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. On move-in day, I unlocked the door and let the children run in first. Their footsteps echoed through the empty rooms. My daughter twirled in the living room. "Mom, this is our house?" I smiled. "Yes, our home." I placed my hand against the wall. Cool, solid, real. No lies behind these doors, no begging, no secrets, just a woman and her children starting over. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the balcony under the dark sky. The city lights flickered below. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant endurance at any cost. I whispered to the night, "Thank you for leaving," not to Kamran, to the version of myself that had been too afraid to change, because she left so I could arrive. And in the quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Life after divorce didn't unfold like a movie montage where everything suddenly becomes perfect. It was slow, uneven, sometimes exhausting, but it was real. And for the first time in years, my life belonged to me. The children adjusted faster than I expected. They decorated their new rooms with drawings and posters. They argued over who got to wash dishes. They made friends in the neighborhood. Their laughter began filling the apartment, replacing the silence that once weighed on my chest. Every small milestone felt like a victory. The first month paying rent on my own, the first parent-teacher meeting I attended alone, the first night I fixed a leaking faucet by watching a video tutorial. I was building proof that I could survive without a man holding the map of my life. Of course, there were nights when fear returned, bills spread across the table, a bank balance that made my stomach tighten, moments when I wished I could share the weight of decisions with someone else. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the woman on her knees begging, and I chose discomfort over humiliation. Kamran remained in the children's lives. He picked them up on weekends. Sometimes he arrived late. Sometimes he canceled. The kids learned, slowly, not to expect too much. That broke my heart in ways I can't fully describe, but I held them through it. I told them the truth in gentle doses. I let them feel their feelings. One evening, my son said, "Dad says you broke the family." The words hit like ice water. I sat beside him and said softly, "Families break when people stop respecting each other. I didn't choose his actions. I chose not to accept them." He thought about it quietly. Then he leaned his head against my shoulder. "I'm glad we're here." In that moment, every fear, every doubt, every sleepless night felt worth it. As time passed, I noticed changes in myself that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with rediscovery. I started reading again, books I used to love but stopped because Kamran teased me for wasting time. I joined a small women's group at work. We shared stories, laughed, sometimes cried. I realized how many women carried silent battles. One day, a colleague asked, "Would you like to come to a self-defense class with us?" I almost declined. Old instincts to stay small, stay safe, don't draw attention. But then I heard my own inner voice say, "Try." I went. I learned how to throw a punch, how to break a hold, how to stand firm. But more than physical skills, I learned something deeper. I didn't have to be fragile. I could protect myself. Months later, on my 43rd birthday, I woke to my children jumping on my bed with handmade cards. My daughter had drawn a picture of our apartment with a heart around it. My son wrote, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know." I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and cried. Happy tears, healing tears. That night, after cake and laughter, I sat alone on the balcony again. I thought about the word strong. I used to believe strength meant enduring pain quietly, staying, sacrificing, holding everything together even when it destroyed you. Now I knew better. Strength was walking away from what broke you. Strength was choosing dignity over familiarity. Strength was rebuilding even when your hands shook. Kamran called that night. He wished me a happy birthday. His voice sounded softer, older. Maybe regret had finally settled in. He said, "I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." I listened. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just a gentle closure. "I hope you're well," I said, and I meant it. After we hung up, I didn't stare at the phone. I didn't replay the past. I simply went inside and locked the door. A year passed, then 2. My career grew. I became a senior bookkeeper. I trained new staff. I laughed in meetings. I walked into rooms without shrinking. The children grew too. They became more confident. They brought friends home. They trusted that their home was stable, safe, warm. One afternoon, my daughter asked, "Mom, will you ever get married again?" I smiled. "I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But if I do, it will be with someone who respects me completely." She nodded like she understood more than her age allowed. Later that evening, I looked in the mirror. My hair was streaked with a few silver strands. My eyes had fine lines at the corners. My body carried the evidence of years lived. And I loved the woman looking back. She wasn't begging. She wasn't apologizing for existing. She wasn't measuring her worth by someone else's attention. She was whole. I thought about how my story began. A woman folding laundry, a phone lighting up, a world cracking open. If I could go back and whisper something to her, I'd say, "This pain will not end you. It will introduce you to yourself." I stopped begging my cheating husband, and I started rebuilding me. Not into someone new, but into who I was always meant to be. And if someone listening to my story is still on their knees, pleading for love that hurts them, I want to say this. There is life beyond that door. There is strength in your quiet voice. There is peace on the other side of your fear. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are just waiting for the moment you finally say, "Enough." And when you do, your story will change too, the way mine did. People often think that once a woman leaves a broken marriage, the story ends neatly. Papers signed, new home, fresh start. But real life doesn't tie bows that easily. Healing is not a straight line. It circles back. It tests you. It asks again and again, do you still believe you deserve better? About 2 years after the divorce, I learned that lesson in a new way. It started with a phone call from Kamran. His voice was shaky, unfamiliar. He told me he had lost his job. The company downsized. His savings were thin. He was struggling to pay rent. For a moment, the old instinct flared inside me, the fixer, the caretaker, the woman who once held a household together with her own exhaustion. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "That must be hard." There was silence. Then he said, "I don't know what to do." I felt the weight of history pressing against my chest. 15 years of shared life, 2 children, a betrayal, a divorce. And now a man who once thought I could not survive without him was asking me indirectly for help. That night I wrestled with myself, not because I wanted him back, but because I didn't want my children's father to fall into ruin, not out of love for him, but out of love for them. In the end, I made a decision. I connected him with a job listing at a company where one of my colleagues worked. I helped him update his resume. Nothing more, no money, no emotional labor, just information, a hand extended without reopening the door. When I told my sister, she said, "You're kinder than I would be." I shook my head. I'm not being kind to him. I'm being kind to my children's future. And that was true. I could help without returning to the cage. Weeks later, he got the job. He thanked me. No dramatic apology, no grand confession, just gratitude. And I realized something subtle and powerful. I could be compassionate without sacrificing myself. That was growth. Around that time, another unexpected thing happened. I started noticing a man at the children's school events, a father. Calm eyes, gentle smile, always carrying extra juice boxes. Our kids played together. We exchanged polite hellos, nothing more. One afternoon, during a school fair, he struck up a longer conversation. His name was Adil. He was widowed. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier. He wasn't looking to replace her, he said, just trying to be present for his daughter. We talked about parenting, about loss, about how life could turn without warning. Our conversation felt easy. No performance, no impressing, just 2 adults sharing space. Over the next months, we spoke more often. Coffee after school meetings, texts about homework schedules, shared jokes about children's energy levels. One evening, he asked if I'd like to have tea sometime. Just tea, nothing complicated. My first instinct was panic. Was I ready? Did I even want something new? Could I trust again? Did I need to? That night, I sat on my balcony and asked myself a hard question. Was I avoiding connection because I didn't want pain, or because I didn't believe I deserved gentleness? I decided to try, slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries. Tea became conversation. Conversation became friendship. Friendship became warmth. Not fireworks, not obsession, just steady kindness. The first time he complimented me, not my appearance, but my strength as a mother, I felt something open inside my chest that had been closed for years. But I stayed aware. I watched my own heart. I promised myself that if I ever felt the urge to shrink, to beg, to chase, I would walk away. This time, love, if it became love, would not cost me myself. When I introduced him to my children as a friend, I watched their reactions closely. My son asked him about cricket. My daughter showed him her drawings. Adil listened, really listened. Later that night, my daughter asked, "Mom, is Uncle Adil going to be part of our life?" I smiled. "Only if we all feel safe and happy." She nodded thoughtfully, then said, "He's nice." I hugged her. I wasn't replacing their father. I was adding kindness where there had once been fear. Months later, Kamran saw Adil picking up the children from school once. He called me that evening, his voice tight. "So, you've moved on." I replied, "I've moved forward. There's a difference." He didn't respond, and for the first time, I didn't care what he thought, because my choices were no longer shaped by his reactions. Not long after that, life threw another challenge. My mother fell ill. Hospital visits, long nights, medical bills, emotional strain. I found myself stretched thin, but not broken. Adil offered support, not solutions, just presence. He sat with the children when I stayed late at the hospital. He brought soup. He didn't ask for anything in return. One night, after a particularly hard day, I leaned my head against his shoulder and cried. Not the desperate sobs of a woman begging for love, but the honest tears of someone allowing herself to be held. And I realized that I wasn't afraid of love anymore. I was afraid of losing myself in it. But this time, I didn't, because I knew who I was before I entered it. Eventually, my mother recovered, slowly, steadily, just like me. One evening, as I tucked my children into bed, my son said, "Mom, you don't look sad anymore." I paused. "Do you think I used to?" He nodded. "A lot before, with Dad." I sat beside him and smoothed his hair. I was sad, but I didn't know I was allowed to stop being sad. He thought about that, then smiled. "I like you happy." So did I. So did I. And that is something no man could ever take away again. By the time 3 years had passed since the day I discovered Kamran's affair, my life looked nothing like the one I once thought was unbreakable, and yet it felt more solid than anything I had known before. My children were thriving. My son had grown tall and quiet like me. My daughter had inherited my stubbornness and his charm. Our apartment had become a home filled with inside jokes, shared chores, and Sunday pancakes. My career was stable. I paid my bills. I saved small amounts each month. I no longer panicked when the fridge broke or when school fees were due. I figured things out, one problem at a time. And Adil, he was still there. Not as a rescuer, not as a replacement, but as a companion in the present. Someone who understood that love was not possession, but partnership. One evening, he asked if I would consider introducing him to my sister as someone special. I smiled. "You already are." He laughed softly. "Then I guess I'm honored." There was no dramatic proposal, no rush, no pressure, just a gentle deepening of something warm and safe. I didn't tell Kamran about this. It wasn't his business, but news travels fast when children talk freely. One weekend, my son mentioned Adil during a visit with his father. When Kamran dropped them off later that day, he looked unsettled. "Is there another man around my children?" he asked. I met his gaze calmly. "There is someone kind in our lives, yes." He scoffed. "You moved on fast." I almost laughed. 3 years of rebuilding, healing, and solitude before allowing anyone close again? Fast? No. "I moved forward," I said again. "You stayed where you were." He didn't reply, and I realized something important. His opinion no longer shaped my sense of worth. That night, after the children slept, I sat on the balcony and thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed loyalty meant enduring anything, the one who thought her value came from keeping a marriage alive no matter the cost. I wished I could hug her, tell her she would survive, that one day she would laugh again, love again, trust herself again. But life doesn't give us time machines. It gives us lessons instead. Around this time, I began sharing parts of my story with a small support group at work, women going through separations, some still in marriages that felt like cages. They listened with wide eyes when I told them I once begged a man to love me. One woman whispered, "I'm still doing that." I held her hand and said, "There is another way, and you're stronger than you think." I didn't tell them my story to feel superior. I told it because I knew how lonely the journey felt at the beginning, and if my voice could make someone feel less alone, then every scar had meaning. One afternoon, my daughter came home with a school assignment. Write about someone who inspires you. She handed me the paper later that night. Under neat handwriting, I read, "My mom inspires me because she made a new life for us. She is not afraid anymore. I want to be like her." I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. In that moment, I knew every painful step had been worth it. Not because my life became perfect, but because my children saw courage instead of helplessness. One quiet weekend, Adil and I took the kids to a park. We sat under a tree while the children played. The wind rustled the leaves above us. He looked at me and said, "I admire how you built your life again. Not many people could." I smiled. I didn't have a choice. "You always have a choice," he said gently. "Most just never realize it." His words settled in my heart, because that was the truth. I had always had a choice, even when I thought I didn't, even when I begged, even when I cried on the bathroom floor. The choice to stay, the choice to leave, the choice to rebuild, the choice to believe in myself. I just needed the pain to wake me up to it. That night, after everyone slept, I stood in front of the mirror, the same mirror where I once whispered apologies to myself. This time, I smiled at my reflection. "You're okay," I said, and she smiled back. Not because life was perfect, but because she was free. Free from begging, free from lying to herself, free to love without losing herself, free to walk away from anything that demanded she shrink. I turned off the light and walked to bed, knowing that whatever the future held, I would face it standing, not on my knees. Never again. There is a strange moment that happens after survival, after rebuilding, after the dust settles. It's the moment when you wake up one ordinary morning, pour tea into your favorite cup, look out the window, and realize you are no longer thinking about the pain that once ruled your life. It happened to me on a quiet Saturday. The children were still asleep. The apartment was filled with soft morning light. I stood by the kitchen counter, key warming my hands, and suddenly understood that I hadn't thought about Kamran in days, not with anger, not with longing, not with grief. He had simply become a chapter behind me. I sat at the small table and smiled at nothing in particular. Peace had arrived so quietly I almost missed it. Later that morning, my daughter walked in, hair messy, eyes half closed. She climbed onto a chair and said, "Mom, I had a dream we lived in a big house with a garden." I laughed. "That sounds lovely." She looked serious. "Maybe one day." In the past, that sentence would have filled me with anxiety. How could I provide more? How could I keep up? How could I compete with the life I once imagined? But now I simply said, maybe one day, because I no longer saw my life as limited by what I had lost. I saw it as open to what I could still create. That afternoon, a deal came over with groceries. We cooked together while the children argued over board games. Music played from a small speaker. There was laughter, comfortable silence, easy cooperation. At one point, I caught myself watching him chop vegetables, not because I needed him, not because I feared losing him, but because I enjoyed his presence. And I thought, this is what love feels like when you are whole first. No desperation, no begging, no performance, just shared space. Later, when the children were distracted, he asked softly, "Have you ever thought about what you want next?" I paused. "Next?" He said, "For yourself, not as a mother, not as someone's partner, just Nadia." I had never been asked that question before, not by Kamran, not by anyone. I thought for a long moment, then said, "I want to travel, just once, alone, somewhere quiet, somewhere I can hear my own thoughts." He smiled. "Then you should." I laughed. "You make it sound so simple." He said, "It is simple, not easy, but simple." That night, after he left, I opened my laptop and searched for solo travel destinations. Not because I would book immediately, but because I finally allowed myself to imagine. Imagine a life not built around someone else's choices. A few months later, I did it. I booked a 3-day trip to a small seaside town. I arranged childcare with my sister. I saved for it carefully. When the day came, I packed a small suitcase and stood at the doorway while my children hugged me tightly. My son said, "You're going on vacation alone?" I smiled. "Yes." "Cool," he said. "Bring us seashells." As the train left the station, I watched the city fade behind me. My heart beat fast, not with fear, but with excitement. I was going somewhere by myself, not to escape life, but to meet myself. At the seaside, I walked along the shore. I listened to waves crash. I ate alone at small cafes. I watched sunsets without explaining my silence to anyone. On the second night, I sat on a bench by the water and thought about the first time I had begged Kamran to choose me. I remembered the shame, the desperation, the feeling of being replaceable. Then I looked at the endless sea and whispered, "Never again." Not as a vow of bitterness, but as a declaration of self-respect. I realized then that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about transforming pain into wisdom, turning heartbreak into boundaries, turning betrayal into self-awareness. When I returned home, the children ran to hug me. Adil smiled warmly at the door. My sister teased me about how relaxed I looked. And I did feel relaxed, but more than that, I felt rooted in myself. Months passed, seasons changed, life moved forward. Kamran and I settled into a functional co-parenting rhythm. He no longer tried to control my choices. I no longer expected anything from him beyond what was necessary for the children. We had become two separate stories linked by shared history, nothing more. One day, my son came home from school upset. A classmate teased him, saying children of divorced parents were broken families. He sat on the couch with angry tears in his eyes. "Are we broken, Mom?" I took his hands, looked into his eyes. "No," I said, "we are rebuilt family, and sometimes rebuilt things are stronger than the original." He thought about that, then smiled. "Like a superhero suit." I laughed. "Exactly like that." That night after he slept, I sat alone in the living room and let pride fill me. Not pride in perfection, but pride in resilience. I once believed my worth was measured by whether a man stayed with me. Now I know my worth was measured by how I stayed with myself. Adil and I continued growing slowly, carefully. No rush, no promises carved in stone, just two people choosing each other without pressure. One evening, he said, "You know, Nadia, you don't need me, and that's exactly why I like being here." I smiled. "I feel the same." And I meant it, because love chosen freely is the only love worth having. As I write this part of my story, I sit in the same apartment that once felt temporary. Now it feels permanent, not because I'll live here forever, but because it represents something I built with my own hands. I stopped begging my cheating husband. I started rebuilding myself. And along the way, I discovered something far greater than a restored marriage. I discovered a restored soul. A woman who stands steady, a mother who leads by example, a heart that knows its own value. And if you are listening to my story, still trapped in a cycle of pleading for love, I want you to remember this. The day you stop begging is the day your real life begins. Not instantly, not magically, but steadily, quietly, powerfully.
There is a chapter in every healing journey that no one talks about. The chapter where everything is fine on the outside, but inside you still feel echoes of the old pain. Not loud, not overwhelming,
just small, sudden reminders that healing doesn't erase memory. It teaches you how to live beside it. For me, that chapter began when my daughter turned 12. She started asking questions about love, about marriage, about why her father and I didn't live together. Children accept things easily when they're young, but as they grow, they want stories that make sense. One evening, while we folded laundry together, she said, "Mom, did Dad ever love you?" The question caught me off guard. I folded a shirt slowly, choosing my words with care. "Yes," I said, "I believe he did, in the way he knew how at the time." She looked thoughtful. "Then why did he hurt you?" I met her eyes. Because sometimes people don't know how to love without harming, and that is why it's important to learn what healthy love looks like. She nodded slowly. "Will you teach me?" Tears pressed behind my eyes. "Yes," I whispered, "I promise." That night, after she slept, I realized that my story wasn't just about survival anymore. It had become guidance, a living lesson passed forward. Around that time, my support group at work asked me to speak at a small women's wellness event, just a short talk, 5 minutes, about rebuilding after heartbreak. 5 minutes turned into writing. Writing turned into reflection. Reflection turned into courage. On the day of the event, I stood in front of 20 women, some married, some divorced, some quietly suffering. My hands trembled slightly as I spoke. I once begged a man to love me. I thought losing him would end my life, but losing myself was far worse. The day I stopped begging was the day I started living. When I finished, a woman in the back wiped her eyes. Another came forward to hug me. One whispered, "I needed to hear that today." Driving home, I realized something profound. My pain had become purpose, not because pain is necessary, but because I chose to let it shape me, not destroy me. Life continued, normal life. Grocery lists, school projects, bills, work deadlines, family gatherings, but beneath the ordinary surface was a woman who had walked through fire and carried her children out safely. One afternoon, I ran into Kamran at a parent-teacher meeting. We stood side by side, listening to our son's teacher praise his progress. For a moment, we were simply two parents. No past, no drama. As we walked out, Kamran said quietly, "He's doing well." "Yes," I said, "he is." There was a pause. Then Kamran said, "You did a good job." Not apologetic, not romantic, just acknowledgement. I nodded. "Thank you." And in that exchange, I realized I no longer needed an apology to feel complete. I had already given myself closure. That evening, I told my children we were ordering takeout and watching a movie. We laughed over spilled soda. We argued over movie choices. We cuddled on the couch. And I thought, this is enough. This is abundance. Later that night, Adil called. He was out of town for work. His voice came through the phone, warm and steady. He said, "I miss your tea," jokingly. I smiled. "You just miss my kitchen skills." "No," he said softly. "I miss the peace I feel around you." I closed my eyes. Peace. That word again. The same peace I once thought impossible. Before we hung up, he said, "One day, if you ever want to, we can talk about a future. No pressure, only if you feel ready." I appreciated that. Not demanding, not possessive, just open. When I ended the call, I didn't feel anxious. I felt grounded because I knew something now that I didn't before. I would never again stay where I had to beg. I would only stay where I was chosen freely. As years continued to pass, my story blended into normalcy. Not the normalcy of pretending, but the normalcy of living authentically. I attended my son's school graduation. I watched my daughter perform in a school play. I cheered at sports days. I cooked birthday dinners. I lived. Sometimes, late at night, I thought back to that kitchen floor where I sat with Kamran's phone in my hand. I remembered the cold tiles beneath me, the shock, the disbelief, the heartbreak. And I realized that woman could never have imagined this life. Not because this life is perfect, but because this life is hers, fully, completely, unapologetically. If I could send a message back through time, I would say, you will laugh again. You will breathe again. You will trust yourself again. You will love again, but differently, wisely, safely. You will build a life where no one has to beg to be valued. And the man who once made you feel small will become a footnote in your story. Not the headline, not the ending, just a chapter that taught you to rise. I stopped begging my cheating husband. I started rebuilding myself. And in doing so, I became the author of my own life, not a character in someone else's. And that is the greatest love story of all. By the time my son entered his teenage years and my daughter followed closely behind, I began to see the full arc of my transformation reflected in their eyes. Children are mirrors. They show you who you've become, not who you pretend to be. One evening, my son came home from school unusually quiet. He sat at the kitchen table while I prepared dinner, pushing rice around his plate without eating. "What's on your mind?" I asked. He hesitated. "There's a girl I like." I smiled softly. "That's a good thing." He looked uncertain. "I don't want to mess up like Dad did." His honesty hit me with unexpected tenderness. I sat across from him and took his hands. "Listen to me," I said. "Your father made choices. That doesn't mean those choices live inside you. You will love differently because you've seen what hurts and what heals." He looked relieved. "How do I know if I'm loving someone right?" I thought about all I had learned the hard way. You don't lie. You don't hide. You don't make someone feel small. And you never stay where you have to beg for love. He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll remember that." As I watched him eat after that, I realized my story had become a guidepost for the next generation. The cycle would not repeat, not in this home. Around the same time, my daughter began growing into her independence. She joined debate club. She challenged teachers. She spoke her mind with confidence. Sometimes I'd watch her argue her point with unwavering clarity and think, she is the daughter of the woman who once begged on her knees, and she will never kneel like that. That was the real victory. Not finding new love, not getting revenge, but breaking a pattern. One weekend, Adil invited us to his sister's house for a family gathering. It was the first time we would be around his extended family. I was nervous, but not because I feared being judged, more because I was stepping into a space that hinted at permanence. At the gathering, his family welcomed me warmly. His mother held my hands and said, "Any woman who raises children with courage is already part of my family." I nearly cried. Later that evening, Adil and I stood outside under a sky full of stars. He said, "You know, my daughter calls you your bonus mom?" I laughed. "That's adorable." He grew serious. "I don't want to rush you, but I want you to know that if one day you wanted to make this official, I'd be honored." I looked at him. Kind eyes. No pressure, no demand, no manipulation. I thought about my journey, the begging, the leaving, the rebuilding, the healing, the solitude, the slow trust. And I realized I didn't fear love anymore. I feared losing myself in it. But with him, I didn't. "I'll think about it," I said. He smiled. "That's all I ask." Months passed. Not much changed on the outside, but inside me, something settled. One evening, while we were cooking dinner together, my daughter whispered, "Mom, is Adil going to be our stepdad?" I nearly dropped the spoon. "Would you like that?" I asked carefully. She shrugged. "I like him. He makes you smile, and he never yells." I hugged her tightly. "Thank you for telling me how you feel." That night, I realized something. I wasn't just choosing for myself anymore. I was choosing for a family. But this time, the choice came from strength, not fear. So on a quiet Sunday afternoon, sitting on the balcony where so many of my thoughts had been born, I called Adil. "If you're still offering that future, I think I'm ready to explore it." His voice softened. "I'd like that very much." We didn't rush to wedding plans. We didn't announce anything dramatic. We simply agreed to walk forward together, slowly, mindfully, with respect. Kamran found out months later through the children. He reacted less dramatically than I expected. Perhaps time had softened his pride. He called me and said, "I heard about you and Adil." I said yes. There was silence. Then he said, "I hope he treats you well." I paused. "I treat me well," I said. "That's why this works." He chuckled quietly. "You've changed." "Yes," I said again. "I have." When I ended that call, I felt nothing heavy. No resentment, no satisfaction, just neutrality. He had been part of my story, but he no longer held any power in it. On the anniversary of my move into this apartment, my children surprised me with breakfast in bed. Burnt toast, overcooked eggs, loud laughter. My son said, "Mom, remember when you said this was our fresh start?" I nodded. He grinned. "It worked." I laughed. Yes, it did. That night, after everyone slept, I wrote in a journal I now kept by my bed. I wrote, "Once I begged a man to love me. Today I wake up loved by my children, respected by my partner, and valued by myself. The difference is not luck. The difference is choice." I closed the journal and turned off the light. My story wasn't ending. It was simply continuing, steady, grounded, and mine. There is something quietly beautiful about the final chapter of a long storm. Not fireworks, not a grand dramatic ending, just a deep exhale, the kind you didn't realize you were holding for years. By the time 5 years had passed since the day I found those messages on Kamran's phone, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt natural, not forced, not performed, just lived. My children were teenagers now, confident, expressive, unafraid to speak their minds. They still visited their father on scheduled days. They loved him, and I encouraged that, not because he deserved my forgiveness, but because they deserved a relationship free from adult bitterness. I had learned that healing doesn't mean erasing the past, it means refusing to let the past control the present. Adil and I had become partners in every sense of the word. We never rushed into marriage out of fear or loneliness. Instead, we chose companionship because life felt gentler together. He moved into our apartment one spring morning with 2 suitcases and a smile that felt like sunlight through curtains. The children welcomed him with easy affection, not because he tried to replace their father, but because he respected the space he was entering. That respect was everything. One night, months later, he asked me something simple while we washed dishes side by side. "Do you ever regret leaving?" I paused, thinking carefully. "No," I said. "I regret the years I spent begging, but I don't regret the choice that saved me." He nodded quietly. "I'm glad you chose yourself." So was I. One summer evening, I sat on the same balcony where my transformation had quietly unfolded over years. The city hummed below. The sky was painted an orange and violet. My daughter sat beside me, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Mom," she said, "if someone ever cheats on me, I'll leave." I smiled sadly. "I hope no one ever does that to you, but if they do, I know you'll remember your worth." She looked at me. "I learned it from you." And in that moment, every tear, every fear, every lonely night felt purposeful, because the greatest inheritance I could give my children was not money or property or comfort. It was self-respect. A few months later, my son brought home his first girlfriend. She sat nervously on our couch while I offered tea. I saw myself in her eyes, young, hopeful, wanting to be chosen. When they left for a walk, my son whispered, "Be nice, Mom." I laughed. "I'm always nice." But when he returned that evening, I pulled him aside and said gently, "Remember what we talked about. Be honest. Be kind. Don't ever make someone beg for your love." He smiled. "I won't." And I believed him. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think of Kamran, not with pain, but with gratitude for the lesson hidden inside the hurt. If he hadn't broken my heart, I might never have discovered my own strength. Not that betrayal was a gift, but survival was. I learned that you don't need closure from someone else to close a chapter. You close it yourself by walking forward and refusing to look back with longing. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning an old drawer, I found a crumpled notebook, the same one where I had written my escape plan years ago. The ink had faded slightly, the handwriting shaky in places. I read the first line, "Find a way out." I smiled and whispered, "You did." I kept the notebook, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of courage. That night, I told Adil about it. He listened, then said, "That notebook built this home." He was right, because every life rebuilt starts with a decision scribbled in quiet determination. Years later, when my daughter left for college, she hugged me tightly at the door. "Thank you for showing me how to be strong," she whispered. And when my son got his first job, he handed me his first paycheck jokingly and said, "See, Mom, I can take care of myself too." I laughed and handed it back, but inside I glowed with pride. They were walking into adulthood with a blueprint I never had. A blueprint that said, love should never cost you your dignity, marriage should never demand your silence, family should never require your suffering, and if it does, you have the right to walk away and rebuild. One quiet night, sitting in bed beside Adil, listening to the soft breathing of a peaceful home, I realized something simple and profound. I had not just rebuilt a life, I had rebuilt a self. The woman who once begged a cheating husband to choose her no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who chose herself every single day. And that is where my story truly ends. Not with revenge, not with tragedy, but with a woman standing tall in her own life, surrounded by love that doesn't demand she shrink. If you've listened this far, I want to leave you with one final truth. You don't have to beg for love. You don't have to stay where you are unseen. You don't have to lose yourself to keep someone else. The moment you choose yourself, everything changes. I am living proof, and this is my story. The end.